Dad, call 911 right now. The engagement party that ended in an arrest. 65 guests were laughing under the string lights. Champagne was still cold in the buckets. And then my daughter pressed her mouth to my ear and whispered 4 words that stopped my heart. She didn't explain. She didn't cry. She just squeezed my arm once, turned around, and walked back to her fiancé with a smile so convincing that if I hadn't felt her hand shaking against my sleeve, I never would have believed anything was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to the beginning. A quick note before we start. Some names, locations, and small details in this story have been changed or blended for privacy and for the flow of the telling. The heart of it, the lesson, the warning, the fight a father and daughter went through together, is real in every way that matters. Part 1. The Ranch, the Promise, and the Widower. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 68 years old, and for most of my adult life, my job was to sit above a courtroom and decide who was telling the truth. I used to think that 36 years of that training had made me immune to being fooled. I was wrong, dead wrong, and it nearly cost my daughter everything she owned. I live on a piece of land called Cumberland River Ranch, about 40 miles north of Nashville, in Robertson County, Tennessee. 340 acres running from the riverbank on one side to a thick stand of old oak and hickory trees on the other, with cattle pasture rolling across most of the ground in between. On a spring morning, when the fog still hangs low over the south field and the cows are moving slow through wet grass, the whole place looks like something out of a painting. Her name was Eleanor. We were married for 31 years. She taught high school English at Robertson County High for almost 3 decades, and she was without question the best person I've ever known. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3 by the time anyone found it. How long? I asked him. It was the only question that mattered. He looked at me, then at Eleanor, then back at me. With aggressive treatment, maybe 18 months. Without it, 6 to 9. Eleanor reached over and put her hand on top of mine. Her fingers were warm, even then. Robert, even in that room, even hearing those numbers, she made me smile. That was who she was. We chose to fight. Our daughter Diane flew in from Memphis nearly every weekend during those last months, sleeping in the chair beside her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand through nights I couldn't be there for. On the 4th day of what turned out to be Eleanor's final week, she was more awake than she had been in days. "The first one's easy," she said. Her voice was thin, but her tone left no room for argument. "I promise." "Good." She squeezed my hand. "The second one is harder to explain. I need you to trust, but verify. Always verify." I frowned. "Eleanor, what do you mean by that?" "I mean exactly what I said." Her grip tightened around my hand. "You spent 36 years reading people from that bench. Don't stop reading them just because they're sitting across from you at your own dinner table." At the time, I thought she meant Diane's career, hospital politics. She closed her eyes. "Good man," she whispered. 3 days later, she was gone. For a long time, I didn't understand what Eleanor had meant by that second promise. I turned it over during long evenings on the porch, watching the cattle settle into the south pasture as the light faded behind the tree line. Not until the night Diane called me from Memphis with something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Part 2. The Man Who Listened. February in Robertson County is a quiet month. The cattle settle into their routines. The timber crews are between seasons. The whole ranch seems to hold its breath, waiting for the ground to soften and the first green shoots to push through the mud. I was at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, a mug of coffee going cold beside a stack of property tax paperwork, when my phone buzzed against the wood. "Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "Yes." A pause. "Actually, yes. More than okay, Dad." I set my pen down. Something in her voice made me sit up straighter. It was lighter than I'd heard it in a long time. Not the careful, controlled lightness she used when she was managing stress at the hospital, but something real and unguarded, something that reminded me of the way she used to sound on Christmas mornings when she was 9 years old. Something complicated happened in my chest. Joy for her, sharp and real, because Diane had spent 3 years pouring every ounce of herself into her career after a painful breakup she'd never fully talked about. And underneath that joy, something smaller and quieter, a reflex I recognized instantly from 36 years on the bench. I pushed it down. "Where were you two talking?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. "By the windows, looking out over the river. We were both at the silent auction." He made some comment about the bourbon being overpriced for a charity event, and I told him that was the entire point of a charity event, and somehow that turned into 2 hours. She laughed, a real laugh, warm and a little surprised at itself. He asked about my work, not the polite version, Dad. Follow-up questions. He wanted to actually understand what a cardiologist does on a Tuesday afternoon. "That's a good sign," I said, and it was. It genuinely was. We exchanged numbers. He texted the next morning. Another pause, softer this time. I wanted you to know." "I'm glad you told me," I said, and I meant it completely. But even as the words left my mouth, I heard Eleanor's voice at the back of my mind, quiet and steady. "Trust, but verify." I reached for my pen. "Tell me about him. Where's he from?" "East Coast somewhere." He mentioned growing up near the coast, but he moved to Charlotte about 16 years ago to build his practice. East Coast somewhere was not a specific answer. I noted it without reacting. He's independent. Works with small and mid-sized companies on acquisitions and financial restructuring. Says he prefers it that way. More flexibility, better client relationships. Independent. No firm to call. No colleagues to verify anything with. "And he's never been married?" I asked, keeping my tone warm. A beat of hesitation. "No. He said he was waiting for the right person." Her voice went quiet at the edges, the way people get careful with something fragile. That detail landed in my chest and stayed there. 43 years old, financially stable, well-spoken, according to Diane. In 36 years on the federal bench, I had learned that a man in his 40s who had never committed to anyone usually fell into one of three categories. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that decades of listening to people lie under oath had made me allergic to trust in ways that weren't fair to apply. "He sounds like he made quite an impression," I said. "He did," she exhaled, and I could hear the smile in it. "I know it's only been a week. I'm not reading too much into it. I just wanted someone to know who'd be happy for me, without immediately asking 20 questions about his financial history." I had just asked 3. "I'm happy for you, Diane," I said. "I mean that." "I know you do." A pause. "He wants to meet you. He said family matters to him, and he wants to do things the right way." I looked out the kitchen window at the dark south pasture, the fence line barely visible against the February sky. "Tell him to come to the ranch," I said. "We'll have dinner." "Really?" The relief in her voice hit me somewhere deep. She'd been bracing for resistance, expecting me to hedge, to make conditions, and maybe she was right to expect that. "Really," I said, "any man who can make my daughter sound like this on a Tuesday in February deserves a fair hearing." She laughed again, and we talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Her caseload, the fence repair Billy Tasker had been putting off since November. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time with my cold coffee and my tax documents, and the silence of the ranch settling around me. Marcus Delaney. I picked up my pen and wrote his name on the corner of a blank page. "Trust, but verify." I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket. I had no idea yet how many months I would carry it there. Part 3. Dinner on the porch. May arrives in Tennessee the way it always does, sudden and generous. The redbuds are already gone, the oaks are full and green, and the air carries the smell of cut grass and river water and something just on the edge of sweet. I'd been up since 5 that Saturday, walking the east fence line with Billy before the heat set in. Billy isn't a man who wastes words, which is one of the reasons I trust him completely. He pointed out 2 sections of fencing that needed work, grunted something about the south pasture being overgrazed near the creek bend, and disappeared back into the barn without another syllable. Some mornings, a man needs quiet more than conversation. By noon, I had the porch table set, a brisket going on the smoker since 7, and a clean shirt on my back. "He's 10 minutes out," she said, straightening her jacket in the hallway mirror. Her hands moved quickly, adjusting her collar twice when once would have done. "He's going to be fine," I said. She looked at me in the mirror. "I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about you." Before I could answer, tires crunched on the gravel drive. Marcus Delaney stepped out of a dark green Ford F-5050, 3 or 4 years old, clean but not new. The kind of truck a man drives when he wants to look unpretentious without actually being unpretentious. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair going silver at the temples, with the easy posture of someone who has spent years walking into rooms full of strangers and making them comfortable. He carried a bottle of 12-year-old Bourbon, expensive enough to show he'd done his homework on Tennessee hospitality, restrained enough not to look like he was trying too hard, that expensive enough. He extended his hand and looked me straight in the eye. "Judge Callahan, thank you for having me. Diane talks about this place like it's the center of the universe." His grip was firm. His smile reached his eyes. He'd called me Judge, not Mister, which told me he had done his research. "Come on in," I said. We walked the property before the meal, the cattle pasture, the tree line, the stretch of river visible from the eastern rise. "You know ranching?" I asked. "I've consulted for a few agricultural operations in the Carolinas," he said smoothly. "You pick things up?" Diane walked beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his arm, watching him the way people watch something they're afraid might disappear. It made my chest ache in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. We ate on the back porch as the afternoon light stretched long and gold across the pasture. "This is the real thing," he said, cutting into the meat. "Not the stuff they serve downtown in Nashville for $40, pretending the smoke flavor is authentic." Diane laughed. I smiled and watched his hands. He was good. Genuinely, professionally good. And that was exactly what troubled me. In 36 years on the federal bench, I sat across from hundreds of witnesses who had prepared their testimony the way actors prepare a role. They knew their lines, they knew their blocking, they knew exactly which emotional beats to hit and when to hit them, and the ones who were lying were almost always more polished than the ones telling the truth, because truth doesn't need rehearsal, and deception does. Marcus Delaney never stumbled, never searched for a word, never contradicted himself, not even on the smallest detail. At 7:15, his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He glanced at it, expression calm. "Excuse me 1 second. Client on the East Coast." He stood, walked to the far end of the porch, and turned his back to us. I watched him. His left hand came up and gripped the porch railing, his shoulders pulled inward. His voice was too low to make out words, but his body told the whole story. Then he turned and caught me watching. What happened in the next half-second was the most honest thing I saw from Marcus Delaney all evening. A reset, fast, almost invisible. The tension drained from his shoulders. His hand dropped to his side. His face rearranged itself back into the easy, confident expression he'd worn all afternoon. He walked back to the table and sat down. "Sorry about that," he said pleasantly. "Acquisition closing next week. Everyone panics at the finish line." "I know how that goes," I said. Diane smiled at him. Later, after Marcus's taillights had disappeared into the dark down the gravel road, Diane found me on the porch with the last of the whiskey and the sound of cattle settling in the south field. "Well?" she asked, her voice careful, working hard to sound like the answer didn't matter. "He's impressive," I said, and I meant it. She exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the truck pulled in. "But, no buts. If you're happy, I'm happy." She hugged me quick and tight and went inside. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, thinking about a man who could reset his entire expression in half a second and never once let his guard down for longer than that. Eleanor's voice came the way it always did. Quiet. "Trust but verify, Robert." I was still working on the second part. Part 4. The Parents from Knoxville. By August, Marcus Delaney had become a fixture at Cumberland Ranch, the way kudzu becomes a fixture on a Tennessee hillside. Gradually, quietly, and then all at once, until you look up one morning and realize it has covered everything you weren't watching closely enough. When Diane told me his parents wanted to drive up from Knoxville to meet us, I said yes before I'd fully thought through what I was agreeing to. James and Ruth Delaney arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a well-kept SUV, dressed in the comfortable, unpretentious clothes of people who'd spent their lives doing honest work and never felt the need to announce it. James was 67, broad through the shoulders, with the unhurried movement of a retiree and a civil engineer's habit of glancing at barn structure and fence posts the way other men glance at a menu. Ruth was 64, warm-eyed, quick to smile. Judge Callahan. James shook my hand with a grip that said he respected the title without being intimidated by it. Marcus has told us so much about this place. I can see why. We brought peach preserves, Ruth said, pressing a jar into my hands with both of hers. Homemade. We've got a tree in the backyard that gives us more than 2 people could ever eat. Diane lit up beside me. Oh, these are beautiful. Mom used to make these. Ruth's expression softened immediately. Marcus told us about Eleanor. I'm so sorry, honey. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. Diane's eyes went glassy for just a moment, that quick, involuntary shimmer that still catches her off guard when someone mentions her mother out of nowhere. She pressed her lips together and nodded. We ate lunch on the back porch. The conversation moved easily. James talked about his 32 years with the State Transportation Department, bridge and highway projects across Tennessee. And that was exactly what bothered me. Not one story contradicted another. Not one detail needed correcting. So, tell me about Marcus growing up, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. What was he like as a kid? Ruth smiled, warm and immediate. Oh, he was a handful in the best way, always into something. James chuckled. Spent more time on that go-kart than he ever spent on his homework. Marcus grinned. In my defense, the homework had far less interesting engineering problems. Diane laughed and squeezed his arm. I smiled and noted that the go-kart story had the rhythm of something told many times before. The setup, the punchline, the fond headshake, polished smooth by repetition. You've got something real here, he said, looking out over the property. A lot of families let places like this go. It means something that you haven't. Eleanor and I built it together, I said. That makes it harder to let go of. He nodded slowly. Marcus talks about Diane the way a man talks about something he intends to keep. I looked at him. His expression was open, sincere, fatherly in all the right ways. My chest tightened with something I couldn't cleanly name, part gratitude, part unease. The sensation of a man being told exactly what he wants to hear by someone who seems to know precisely what that is. I appreciate that, I said. That evening, after James and Ruth's taillights had disappeared down the county road, Diane hugged me in the driveway with her whole self, the way she used to when she was small and something had gone exactly right. Thank you, Dad, she said against my shoulder. This meant everything. I held her and said nothing, because what was I supposed to say? Later that night, well past midnight, I was crossing from the house to check on a heifer Billy had flagged as possibly calving early. I passed the east side of the barn. Marcus was standing in the shadows near the equipment door, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. I already told you, he said, sharp enough to carry. Stop second, guessing the timeline. Everything's moving exactly the way it's supposed to move. I stopped walking. He hadn't heard me. I stood in the dark. Then his boots scraped gravel as he turned. I stepped back into the shadow of the fence line and waited until I heard him end the call and go back inside. I stood in the dark for a long moment, the night warm and heavy around me, the cattle quiet in the south pasture, the ranch looking exactly as peaceful as it always had. I reached into my shirt pocket. The folded paper with Marcus Delaney's name on it was still there, right where I'd put it the night Diane first called. I hadn't unfolded it yet. I was beginning to think it was time. Part 5. 60 seconds on a laptop. 3 weeks before the engagement party, On a Sunday morning in March, my daughter opened a spreadsheet on her fiancé's laptop and watched her entire future rearrange itself in the space of 60 seconds. She didn't tell me that night. She didn't tell me the next day or the day after that. She carried it alone for 3 weeks, turning it over and over the way you turn something sharp in your hands, hoping to find an angle where it doesn't cut you. Marcus had been staying at the ranch for the weekend. Sunday morning, he was in the shower. His laptop sat open on the desk in the guest room, screen still lit. Diane needed to look something up quickly, a medication interaction for a patient, something she wanted to double-check before her Monday shift. She used his laptop the way she'd use her own. She told me later that she almost closed it, that her hand was already moving toward the tab, when something in the file name stopped her. Those 2 letters at the front, CD. She opened it. Column of listed asset categories. Real estate, $28 million. Investment accounts, $31 million. The Callahan Family Trust, $8 million. The numbers weren't approximate. They weren't rounded. They were exact. The kind of precision that requires access to real documents, real account statements, real legal filings. The kind of research that takes weeks and a specific, deliberate intention. In Tennessee, as in most states, a family trust can be modified by its grantor or its current trustee. Column C outlined a timeline. A 30-day window, post-marriage, described with a single chilling phrase, before legal intervention can be initiated. You don't write that phrase if you're planning something legitimate. You write it if you're planning something that has to be finished before anyone can stop you. And at the very top of the file, in the header cell, 2 letters, CD Diane Callahan. She heard the shower turn off. She closed the laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I almost knocked it off the desk, she told me. I could hear him moving around in the bathroom. Marcus came out of the bathroom, hair still damp, towel around his waist, completely relaxed. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I think I did." She kissed him. She made coffee. She sat across from him at the guest room table and talked about engagement, party catering, and whether the string light should go up Friday or Saturday, while her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. When she finished telling me all of this, standing in the wet grass of the south pasture with the morning light just burning off the river mist, her jaw was set so tight I could see the muscle working in her cheek. "I kept trying to find a reason it wasn't what it looked like," she said, her voice cracking at the edges for the first time. "Maybe it was a client file with similar initials. Maybe it was some kind of financial planning document his attorney prepared. I went through every explanation I could think of, Dad. Every single one." She pressed her lips together hard, fighting something back. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out with a cold instrument. $67 million. Every asset Eleanor and I had spent 40 years building, mapped out in a spreadsheet with a 30-day theft timeline attached to it. "Why didn't you call me?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. She looked up at me, and her eyes finally broke. Not a flood, a single sharp crack, tears spilling fast down both cheeks before she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "Because I was afraid I was wrong," she said, muffled against her own hand. "Because if I was wrong, I would have accused an innocent man and destroyed everything." She stopped, steadied herself. "Because I needed to be sure before I said it out loud. Saying it out loud makes it real." I reached over and put my hand on her shoulder. "It's real," I said quietly. She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, jaw still tight, something shifting behind her eyes, from pain into something harder, colder, and far more useful. It was the exact look Eleanor used to get when she'd made a decision and was done reconsidering it. I recognized it immediately. And for the first time since the night before, something in my chest unclenched, just slightly. He had chosen the wrong family's daughter to target. Part 6. 4 words at the engagement party. April at Cumberland Ranch is the most beautiful month of the year. On the night of my daughter's engagement party, Every bit of it felt like a stage set. By 7 o'clock, 65 guests had filled the back garden. String lights ran between the old oak trees, casting gold light across white linen tables. Caterers moved through the crowd with trays of appetizers, and the bar near the stone wall was doing steady business in Tennessee whiskey and sweet tea. Marcus stood near the center of it all, his arm around Diane's waist, laughing at something one of her colleagues had said. I stood at the edge of the porch with a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched and watched him work the room. Judge Callahan. He raised his glass slightly. You put together a beautiful evening. Diane put it together, I said. I provided the property and stayed out of the way. He laughed, that warm, genuine-sounding laugh I'd heard dozens of times by then. That's the sign of a wise man, knowing when to contribute and when to let the capable people work. I smiled. Something moved across his face, fast, almost invisible, the micro-expression of a man asked a question, one layer deeper than he'd prepared for. His eyes made a small recalibration. I'd want to see the current lease terms before advising anything specific, he said smoothly. But generally, 10-year commitments and mineral rights favor the lessee unless there's a strong escalation clause tied to commodity pricing. I'd push for a shorter initial term with renewal options. It was a reasonable answer. It sounded knowledgeable, but it was also a general answer. The kind you give when you've read enough to seem credible without knowing enough to be specific. Good point, I said pleasantly. I'll keep that in mind. He excused himself to find Diane, and I watched him cross the garden with that unhurried, confident stride. At 8:47, I noted the time, because a judge never fully loses the habit of noting times. Diane broke away from a cluster of her hospital colleagues near the rose arbor. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping twice to hug guests, laughing at something a neighbor said. She reached me near the stone wall at the far edge of the garden. She wrapped both hands around my arm, the way she used to when she was small and wanted to tell me something important. She leaned close, her cheek nearly touching mine, her lips at my ear. Dad, her voice was barely a breath, stripped down to pure urgency. Call 911, right now. Then she stepped back, turned toward a passing guest with a full, genuine-looking smile, exchanged a brief hug, and walked back across the garden to Marcus. I stood at the stone wall with my untouched whiskey and felt the words land in my chest, like something dropped from a height. Not investigate, not be careful, not I need to talk to you later, call 911. She had seen something that night. I breathed in slowly through my nose. Across the garden, Marcus caught my eye. For the next 40 minutes, I was the father of the bride-to-be. I shook hands, told stories, laughed at the right moments, asked after grandchildren by name. I was present and gracious and completely, deliberately unremarkable, and the whole time, beneath every word, my mind was running the way it used to run during the worst trials, cold and fast and completely focused, sorting through what I knew, what I needed to know, and exactly what I was going to do the moment the last car left my driveway. After the guests were gone, I sat down and looked at her face for a long time. You knew, I said. You saw something in him before he ever set foot on this property, didn't you? The photograph didn't answer, but I heard her anyway. Trust but verify, Robert. Tomorrow morning, I was going to start verifying everything. Part 7. Building a plan in the wet grass. The morning after the engagement party, Cumberland Ranch looked exactly the same. The same cattle moving slow through the south pasture. The same mist sitting low over the river. The same gray light coming gradual over the tree line, the way it had come every morning for 41 years. The world hadn't adjusted its appearance to account for what I now knew was happening inside it. I'd been awake since 3:30. I gave up on sleep at 4:15, dressed in the dark, and went downstairs to make coffee. At 5, I picked up my phone and typed a text to Diane. Her reply came 4 minutes later. On my way. She appeared at the back gate 7 minutes after that. We didn't speak until we'd walked the full length of the south fence line and reached the far corner where the property met the old creek bed. far enough from the guest house that Marcus would only see two figures walking in the early light. Diane stopped and turned to face me, arms crossed over her chest, jaw tight, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." She took a breath that shook slightly on the way in and steadied on the way out. Then she began. "She told me about the phone at the party. He put it face up on the cocktail table," she said, her voice flat and controlled. "He does that sometimes when he's in a conversation, sets it down so people know he's not distracted. But last night he put it down while he was talking to Dr. Hensley from the hospital, and I was standing 2 feet away, and the screen lit up with a notification." "What kind of notification?" "A photo confirmation from his camera app." She pressed her lips together hard. The thumbnail was small, but I could see enough. It was a document, a legal document from what I could tell. The letterhead looked like it was from your study. My chest went cold. "He photographed documents from my study." "That's what it looked like." Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly before she pulled it back. "I don't know when. He's been in the house alone twice in the last month while I was at the hospital and you were out on the property. I didn't think anything of it. I trusted him, Dad." The last 3 words came out raw and jagged like something torn. "I trusted him completely." I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She stood there absorbing the contact, the way a person absorbs something they need but aren't sure they deserve. "You trusted him because he was designed to be trusted," I said. "That's not a failure of your judgment. That's what he does." She looked up at me, eyes glassy, but fierce. "No," I said immediately. "We do not confront him. Not yet." "Dad. Dad." Diane stared at me. A muscle worked in her jaw. "So I have to keep pretending." "Yes." I held her gaze. "I know how hard that is. But right now, the only advantage we have is that he believes we're still in the dark. The moment that changes, we lose everything." She turned away and looked out over the south pasture, the cattle moving slow in the early mist. "How long?" she asked. "As long as it takes to build a case that puts him in a federal courtroom," I said. "I'm calling our estate attorney this morning. Then I'm calling an investigator, someone who does this professionally. We find out who Marcus Delaney really is, what he's done before, and we build evidence that holds up. Then we move." She was quiet a moment, staring at the fence line. "He was going to marry me on a Saturday," she said, "sign the documents on a Friday, rob us on a Monday, and smile at me the whole time." "Yes," I said, "that appears to be the plan." Her chin came up. "Then let's make sure it's the last plan he ever runs." Across the yard, a light came on in the guest house kitchen window. Marcus, awake, starting his morning. He moved past the window, coffee mug in hand, and glanced out toward the pasture. He saw us standing by the fence. Diane raised her hand and waved back. Her face was warm and easy and gave away absolutely nothing. I lifted my hand and waved too. He had no idea that the two people sitting across from him had just decided to dismantle him. Part 8. Calling in the professionals. Marcus left the ranch at 10:30 that Monday morning. He loaded his overnight bag into the dark green F-50, hugged Diane on the front porch for a long moment with his chin resting on top of her head, and shook my hand with that firm, steady grip I'd been studying for 11 months. He said the weekend had been perfect. I was on the phone before his dust had settled. The first call went to Patricia Odom. Pat had been the Callahan family's estate attorney for 18 years. A sharp, precise woman of 53 who wore red suits to depositions because, she said, it made opposing counsel underestimate her, and she'd never once been underestimated twice. "Robert, what's wrong?" "I need to understand something about the family trust," I said. "Hypothetically." A pause. "Go ahead." "Diane gets married. Her husband is added as co-trustee. How fast can assets be moved?" The pause this time was longer. When Pat spoke again, her voice had dropped half a register. The shift from attorney to ally. The Callahan Family Trust was established under Tennessee Code. Diane became sole trustee at 30. "You no longer carry signing authority, Robert, which means you cannot unilaterally block a modification she initiates." She stopped. Just answer the question. $67 million, I said. In 3 days. I heard Pat exhale sharply. Robert, tell me everything. I told her about the spreadsheet, the columns of numbers, the phrase before legal intervention can be initiated, the photo notification on Marcus's phone at the engagement party, and 11 months of a performance so polished it had fooled everyone in this family except Eleanor. When I finished, Pat was quiet for 4 full seconds. I want to hurt him, she said, and it was the first time in 18 years I'd heard her sound like anything other than composed. Then her voice steadied. I have a contact at the FBI Financial Crimes Division, Nashville Field Office, Agent Brenda Kowalski. She is thorough, she is aggressive, and she will want this case. I'm hiring an investigator, I said. When I have proof, I'll call you. Move fast, Pat said. If this man is working a timeline, you are already behind it. The second call went to Victor Haynes. I'd met Victor 15 years earlier during a federal investigation into a tax fraud scheme that touched 4 states and 17 shell companies. He answered his cell on the third ring, his voice carrying the unhurried calm of a man who had heard urgent requests before and knew better than to match their energy. Victor Chakir, I said. I need a full background investigation. Everything. Name, Marcus Delaney, 43 years old. Claims to be a financial consultant based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Says he grew up on the East Coast, no specific state. Independent practice, no firm affiliation, never been married. No visible social media presence beyond a LinkedIn, and 1 personal profile set to private. What's the timeline? Victor asked. My daughter is marrying him in 10 weeks. She found a spreadsheet on his laptop 6 days ago outlining a plan to steal $67 million from the family trust within 30 days of the wedding. Victor didn't respond immediately. I heard the sound of a pen moving. Too clean, I said. His digital footprint looks like it was built rather than lived. No employment gaps, no old photos, no trail of complaints, 2 LinkedIn recommendations from accounts I can't verify. Everything exactly right. That's a constructed identity, Victor said. It wasn't a question. How thorough do you need? I need to know who he actually is, what he's done before, and anyone working with him. I need evidence that holds up in a federal courtroom. Thorough is 10 days. I can push it to 3 on the critical leads. Identity verification, prior operations, known associates. The deeper financial trail takes longer. 3 days on the critical leads, I said. Call me the moment you find anything. Understood. A pause. Judge Callahan, if this man is what you're describing, he has done this before. People like this don't build this kind of operational sophistication on their first attempt. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, I said. I ended the call and stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, the Monday morning silence of the ranch settling around me. Real people have messy digital histories. They have old posts they regret, and employment gaps they explain awkwardly, and professional disagreements that surface in unexpected places. Marcus Delaney had none of that. Part 9. A call from a man named Dennis. On the third evening, I was sitting on the porch with a glass of water and the property tax documents I still hadn't finished when my phone rang. My hand tightened on the phone. Dennis was a former colleague from my courthouse years, now running an independent legal consulting practice in Nashville. We talked a few times a year, the way men do when they've worked alongside each other long enough to trust each other's judgment without needing to explain why. I answered before the second ring finished. Dennis. Robert. His voice was careful, tense in a way I recognized immediately. I saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter this morning, the photograph of Diane and her fiancé. I have presided over hundreds of trials in 36 years on the federal bench, and I've learned that the moment a case breaks open rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Tell me what you saw, I said. The Tennessee Bar Association sends out a monthly newsletter, Dennis said. My hand tightened around the phone. Knoxville, 2 years ago. I was consulting on a commercial real estate transaction, a partnership deal involving a mixed-use development on the north side of the city. The other party brought in a consultant named Daniel Reeves. He was supposed to be facilitating the financial structuring. Charming, well-prepared, knew enough terminology to sound credible. I stood up from the porch chair without consciously deciding to. Before I could build a full case, he disappeared, stopped returning calls. The deal collapsed. My client lost $180,000 in preparation fees, legal costs, and earnest money he couldn't recover because the partnership documents had been structured in a way that insulated Reeves from personal liability. Dennis exhaled sharply. My client was 61 years old, Robert. He put that money together over 3 years. He didn't lose his home. Are you certain it's the same man? I pulled the newsletter photograph up on my screen and set it next to a security badge photo my client had taken of Reeves at their first meeting. Standard practice for his firm. They photograph every external consultant. I walked to the edge of the porch and stood there. The evening air warm against my face, cattle moving in the south pasture below, the full weight of what I was hearing settling onto my shoulders like something physical. Daniel Reeves, I said. Knoxville 2 years ago. There may be more names, Dennis said. This kind of operation, constructed identity, targeted approach, disappeared before charges can be filed. That takes practice, Robert. I have an investigator running his background now, I said. I'm calling him tonight with this. Good. A pause. Robert, how is Diane? I looked out at the ranch. The fence line Eleanor had walked on Sunday mornings. The tree line going dark against the evening sky. The guest house sitting quiet across the yard where Diane was, right at that moment, sitting through a phone call with Marcus about wedding flowers, carrying the weight of everything she knew. She's stronger than anyone should have to be, I said. She gets that from her mother. She gets that from both of you, Dennis said quietly. After I ended the call, I dialed Victor Haynes immediately. He answered on the first ring. I was about to call you, Victor said, his voice carrying an urgency I hadn't heard from him before. I have something, but you go first. Victor was quiet for a moment. I could hear typing. The porch felt unsteady under my feet. He stole a real person's identity. Borrowed enough of it to construct a plausible surface, Victor said. Social security number variation, same first and last name, different date of birth. How many names are we looking at? In 6 days, I've confirmed 3 separate identities tied to the same biometric profile. Marcus Delaney. I sat down on the porch steps because my legs made that decision before I did. 3 names, 3 confirmed operations, 3 families. Victor, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. How long has this been going on? Based on what I have so far, at least 5 years, possibly longer. Tell me about the woman who filed the complaint. Her name was Caroline Marsh, 26 years old at the time, a law student. That could have been me if Diane hadn't found that spreadsheet. If she hadn't trusted me enough to walk out to the south pasture that morning and tell me the truth. Caroline Marsh, I said. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Where is she now? She finished law school, Victor said. She is currently practicing as a fraud attorney in Louisville, Kentucky. Before I tell you what Victor found next, and I'll warn you now, it changes everything. Part 10. The man behind 4 names. Victor Haynes called on the 6th day at 11 in the morning. I was standing in the east pasture, checking the fence line Eleanor used to walk on Sunday mornings, the same stretch of old cedar posts and wire running along the creek bed toward the tree line, the ground still soft from rain 2 nights before. I had taken to walking it every day since the engagement party, the way some people pace when they can't sit still. The cattle ignored me. My phone buzzed. Victor Haynes. Tell me, I said. My knees buckled. I grabbed the top wire of the fence with my free hand and held on. Keep going, I said. The business collapsed, I said. Within 4 months, Daniel lost the company, the building, his retirement accounts, and eventually his home. I let go of the fence wire and sat down in the wet grass between the cedar posts, the phone pressed to my ear, the east pasture stretching out around me in the morning light. A man I had never met. A father who had loved his daughter welcomed the wrong person, lost everything, and decided the only thing left to do was disappear. Victor, My voice scraped coming out. 2 years ago, Owen ran the Daniel Reeves operation in Knoxville, the one your colleague Dennis identified. Before he could complete it, Dennis started pulling on his references, and Owen cut and ran. What happened? Owen and Linda were together for 14 months, he proposed. They set a wedding date. The fury that moved through me was cold and precise, not hot. He paid him $3.5 million, Victor said, wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours of the agreement being signed. William Hargrove told my contact that he regrets it every single day. Owen Garrett had taken $3.5 million from a man trying to protect his daughter, and he had used it to finance the operation against mine. Is he working alone? I asked. She prepares the documents, I said. She's the legal infrastructure of every operation Owen runs. My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. The first email is from 6 months ago. Sandra to Owen, target confirmed. CD, Diane Callahan. I was on my feet without knowing I had stood up, pacing the east fence line in the wet grass. The phone so tight against my ear I could feel my... Robert, Victor said, steady. I have enough for the FBI, financial conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, interstate fraud. This is a federal case, and it's solid, but Agent Kowalski will want to catch them in the act. The rehearsal dinner is 8 weeks away. That's the moment. 8 weeks. 56 days of watching Owen Garrett sit at my kitchen table and smile at my daughter. Send everything to Patricia Odom tonight, I said. And Victor, find out who else knew. He had information about this family he could not have gathered without help from someone close to us. Someone gave him Diane's schedule. Someone told him about the trust. A pause. I'll keep digging. I ended the call and stood in the east pasture, morning light on the grass, Eleanor's fence line running away from me toward the timber, and the knowledge of what a man named Owen Garrett had done to a father named Daniel Marsh sitting in my chest like a stone I would carry for the rest of my life. I made myself a promise standing there in the wet grass. This ends with us. Part 11. Caroline Marsh. Patricia Odom called at 3 o'clock that same afternoon. I was still at the kitchen table with Victor's documents spread in front of me, printouts of Owen Garrett's constructed identities, the email correspondence between Owen and Sandra Put, the financial trail connecting 3 destroyed families to the man who had been sitting on my porch, drinking my whiskey, asking about my mineral leases. My chest tightened. Daniel Marsh's daughter. She saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter. She recognized Owen's photograph immediately. Give me her number. Caroline Marsh answered on the second ring. Her voice was young, she was 29, but it carried a weight that had nothing to do with age. The voice of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had learned to walk straight under it. Mr. Callahan, she said, I've been staring at that photograph for 6 hours, trying to decide if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing, and then I decided it didn't matter whether I was sure. I had to make the call. You were right to call, I said. Tell me what you know. She told me about her father the way people tell stories they've rehearsed 1,000 times in their own heads, hunting for the version that hurts the least. Daniel Marsh had built his furniture company from a single workshop in a rented garage. He was the kind of man who showed up. He was a good man, Caroline said, her voice cracking on the last word before she pulled it back hard. He was just a good man who trusted the wrong person because he wanted good things for me. Owen targeted him through me. I introduced them. I thought Ryan Colton was genuine. I thought he was the real thing. So you're not behind him anymore, I said. I heard her exhale a long, shaking breath. 3 years of accumulated weight releasing all at once. How is your daughter? Angry, I said, scared. But she's the one who found the evidence. She's the reason we're having this conversation. Your father didn't get that chance, Caroline said quietly. And I understood she wasn't talking about me anymore. She was talking about Daniel, about what it would have meant if he'd found the spreadsheet first, if he'd walked out to a fence line with his daughter and decided to fight instead of sitting alone with the weight of what had been taken from him. No, I said, he didn't, and I am sorry for that, Caroline, more than I can say. She was quiet a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and clear. You will, I said. I promise you that. After the call, I sat in the study with Eleanor's photograph on the desk, thinking about Daniel Marsh driving to that park on a Tuesday morning in October, and about Caroline, 26 years old. Then Patricia called back. She'd been on the phone with Agent Brenda Kowalski at the FBI's Nashville field office while I was talking to Caroline. Brenda reviewed Victor's package, Patricia said. She wants to move. The plan is the rehearsal dinner. Catch Owen and Sandra in the act with documents in hand. She's sending 2 agents to meet with you at the ranch tomorrow morning. A pause. Robert. She told me to tell you this is one of the cleanest conspiracy cases she's seen in 12 years. Owen Garrett is going to federal prison. The only question is how long. Long enough, I said. Make sure it's long enough. That evening, I drove to Memphis and sat across from Diane in a corner booth at a diner 3 blocks from the hospital, away from anyone who might know us. Diane listened without interrupting. Her coffee went cold in front of her. When I finished, she looked at me across the table, jaw set, eyes bright and fierce, and said, 8 weeks, I confirmed. She nodded once, sharp and final. Then let's make sure every single one of those 8 weeks counts. 8 weeks sounds like a long time, until you're living inside them. Part 12. Learning to perform. Agent Brenda Kowalski arrived at Cumberland Ranch the morning after my call with Patricia, driving a plain sedan with Tennessee plates, and the efficient, unhurried manner of someone who had been building federal cases since before Diane finished medical school. She was 46, sharp-eyed, with close-cropped dark hair and the particular stillness of a person who has learned that the best interrogation technique is simply to wait. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours while she walked me through the operational plan with the precision of a surgeon explaining a procedure she'd performed dozens of times. We let them believe everything is proceeding on schedule, she said, spreading a floor plan of a large Nashville hotel across the table. Sandra Pugh will arrive the day before the rehearsal dinner and check in under her consulting firm's name. She'll present herself to Owen as a legal advisor helping with post-marriage estate planning. That's her cover for bringing the documents. And if they separate? I asked. You follow Owen. He's the primary. Sandra won't run without him. She folded the floor plan. Judge Callahan, I need to ask you something directly. Can you sit across from this man for 8 more weeks without showing him what you know? I thought about 36 years of listening to testimony from people who had done terrible things and showing them nothing but the measured attention of the bench. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. She gathered her documents. Because the moment he suspects anything, he runs, and if he runs, he rebuilds, and he finds someone else's daughter. Owen came to the ranch the following weekend, and the weekend after that, and every weekend for 8 weeks. He helped Billy Tasker replace the east barn door that had been warping since February. He sat on the porch after dinner and talked about the wedding venue's catering menu and whether we should add a second bartender for the reception. She never broke, not once, not in front of him, but I found her twice in the kitchen after Owen had gone to bed. I set down the plate I was carrying and looked at him. That's Diane's decision. He smiled, completely unruffled. Of course. I just mean I want to make sure she's protected going forward. That's all I've ever wanted. The word protected landed the way it always did, with a weight that had nothing to do with its stated meaning. She's well protected, I said pleasantly, and went back to clearing the table. Judge Callahan, she said, her voice shaking slightly, I need to tell you something. I should have said it months ago, and I didn't, and I'm so sorry. She pressed her lips together hard. I saw things about Marcus, the way he was always stepping away for phone calls, the trips that never quite added up, the questions he asked about the ranch and the trust and the estate, questions that felt like more than just getting to know the family. Her eyes filled. I put my hand on her shoulder. You're telling me now, I said. That matters. What can I do? Tell me what I can do, she said. Come to the rehearsal dinner, I said. Sit with Diane. When this is over, she's going to need the people who showed up. Jessica nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand, pulling herself together with visible effort. 7 days. Owen Garrett would arrive at the hotel in 7 days, believing he was 48 hours from the cleanest score of his career. Sandra Pute would be in a room down the hall with documents she'd spent 3 years perfecting, and I would be walking into that hotel with a recorder in my breast pocket and 36 years of patience that had never once failed me when it mattered most. Eleanor's voice came as I walked back through the garden toward the house, quiet and certain the way it always was. Trust, but verify, Robert. I had verified everything. Now it was time to act. Part 13. The Rehearsal Dinner. I arrived at the hotel at 1 in the afternoon, 6 hours before the rehearsal dinner. Victor Haynes met me in the lobby near the fountain, dressed in a gray sport coat that made him look like any other Nashville businessman checking in for a conference. He shook my hand, pressed a small device into my palm, matte black, about the size of a car key, and spoke without looking at me directly. "Battery runs 6 hours," he said. "Already active. Everything in range of your left breast pocket transmits in real time to Kowalski's vehicle in the parking structure." He paused. "You ready for this?" I slipped the device into my jacket pocket and felt its weight settle against my chest, directly over my heart. "Been ready for 8 weeks," I said. Sandra Pute had checked into a room on the 4th floor that afternoon, under the name of her shell consulting firm. "Judge Callahan, you clean up well for a cattle rancher." "I had a good reason tonight," I said, accepting a glass of bourbon from the bartender. I looked at him directly. "Shouldn't be better." He took a sip of his drink. "2 more days and she's mine forever." The word "mine" landed with a precision he didn't intend. At 8:30, Owen stood to give the rehearsal dinner toast. He raised his glass, looked around the room with that practiced warmth, and let his eyes settle on Diane at the center of the table. "I spent a long time believing that some people simply don't get what they deserve," he said. His voice was smooth and genuine sounding, and every word out of his mouth was a lie. The room applauded. Glasses rose. Diane touched her glass to his and smiled. At 8:522, Owen excused himself. I watched him go. I waited 4 minutes, long enough that no one would connect my departure to his. Then I excused myself quietly, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and moved down the carpeted hallway. I heard them before I reached the door. Sandra Pute's voice was clipped and professional, stripped of anything resembling warmth. Owen's voice was calm, satisfied, the voice of a man watching pieces fall into place. "Monday submission, Tuesday morning confirmation from the bank," Sandra said. "Tuesday afternoon, the funds transferred to the intermediary account in Delaware. By Tuesday evening, they move to the Lisbon account. We fly out Tuesday at 2. A pause. "And the old man?" Owen asked. Sandra made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Robert Callahan hasn't had signing authority on that trust since Diane turned 30. He has no legal standing to block or reverse a co-trustee transaction executed with proper documentation. I had everything I needed. The plan, the timeline, the bank, the account structure, the acknowledgement that both of them knew exactly what they were doing and exactly who they were doing it to. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. One word. I sent it. Then I did something Agent Kowalski hadn't planned for. I knocked on the door. Maybe it was 36 years of needing to see the moment a verdict gets delivered. Maybe it was the part of me that isn't a judge, but a father. The part that had watched his daughter shake without sound at a kitchen sink for 8 weeks and needed Owen Garrett to understand face to face that the person he had underestimated most was standing on the other side of this door. The door opened. Owen's expression moved through surprise, calculation, and something colder, all in the space of 2 seconds. Diane stepped into the doorway beside me. Then Jessica, 1 step behind her. Owen looked at Diane. Something crossed his face, not guilt, but the specific, recalibrating expression of a man who has just discovered that the asset he planned to take has been watching him the entire time. "Diane," he started. "Don't," she said. Her voice was so steady it cut the air cleanly. 60 seconds later, Agent Kowalski came through the door with 2 agents behind her, badges raised, voices clear and official and final. It was over. Almost. Part 14. The man he sentenced. Agent Kowalski moved through the room with the efficient calm of someone who had done this many times and understood that speed and precision mattered more than drama. Owen Garrett, badge raised, her voice carrying the particular authority of federal law enforcement in the moment it stops being procedural and becomes final. Also known as Marcus Delaney, Daniel Reeves, Ryan Colton, and Nathan Shaw. She turned to Sandra. Two agents moved forward with handcuffs. Owen didn't resist the handcuffs. He stood with his wrists behind his back and looked at Diane with an expression that had shed every layer of the performance, leaving something stripped and cold underneath. Then he looked at me. "You want to know who I am?" he said. His voice was quiet, not angry. Quieter than anger, which was worse. "My real name is Owen Garrett. I was born in Cookeville, Tennessee. 43 years old." He held my gaze steadily. "And 15 years ago you sentenced my brother to 12 years in federal prison." The room contracted. I searched my memory the way I had 1,000 times over a career. Methodically, without rushing, moving through the catalog of cases that had defined 3.5 decades on the bench. Federal fraud cases, wire fraud, conspiracy, Tennessee defendants. "Thomas Garrett," I said. Owen's expression shifted. Something moved through it that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived somewhere between them. "You remember?" "I remember the case," I said. "I did not know he had a brother." Nobody knew. Owen's voice stayed level, controlled, but there was something underneath it now, a pressure that had been building for 15 years, looking for a place to go. "I denied his appeal because the evidence was conclusive," I said. "He defrauded 23 retired people. Some of them lost everything. He died in that prison." Owen's voice cracked for the first time. A single fracture quickly sealed, year 5. Diane stood in the doorway. Sandra stepped forward from where an agent had positioned her, voice flat and stripped of everything except the fact of it. "Victor Haynes found the connection, I assume." She didn't wait for an answer. "Our father was Patrick Garrett. He abandoned Owen's mother when Owen was 6 years old. He abandoned my mother when I was 8. Kowalski stepped between them and me." "That's enough." She nodded to the agents. "Take them out." Owen was turned toward the door. Then he stopped, not resisting, just stopping for the space of one breath, and looked back at me over his shoulder. "Ask yourself something," he said, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear it clearly. "I am good at what I do, Judge Callahan, but I am not good enough to find your daughter's schedule, your trust structure details, and your family's financial records on my own, from Charlotte, North Carolina." Then the agents walked him through the door and down the hall, his footsteps fading into the thick carpet, until the sound disappeared entirely. The room felt suddenly emptier than its square footage explained. Diane crossed to me in 3 steps and pressed her face against my shoulder. For the first time in 8 weeks, she didn't have to perform anything. "It's done," I said against her hair. "Is it?" I looked at Victor Haynes over Diane's shoulder. Agent Kowalski returned from the hallway, her face carrying the controlled gravity of a case that had just developed a new dimension. "We have them both in custody. Sandra will be processed tonight." She looked at me directly. "What Garrett said about an inside source, we take that seriously. I'm opening a secondary investigation, effective immediately." "There's something else," I said. "He mentioned a name before they arrested him at the bar. He implied someone with institutional knowledge, someone who knew this family before he ever arrived in Memphis." Kowalski nodded slowly. I stood in the hotel room with my daughter still trembling against my chest. Someone close to this family had wanted this to happen. I needed to find out who. Part 15. The Barn. We were back at Cumberland Ranch by 9:30. Diane sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier, staring at the middle distance with the particular exhaustion of someone whose body has finally stopped running on adrenaline and doesn't know what to replace it with. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark south pasture, thinking about Owen Garrett being processed at a federal holding facility in Nashville, thinking it was finished. My phone rang at 10:47. Agent Kowalski. I answered before the second ring completed. "Mr. Callahan." Her voice was tight and controlled, in the way that means the news is bad and the professionalism is working hard to contain it. The kitchen felt like it shrank by half. I turned from the window. Diane was already looking at me. She'd heard enough of the call from across the room to understand. Her face went pale under the kitchen light, her hands tightening around the cold mug until her knuckles went white. "He's coming here," she said. "Not a question." "We don't know that," I said, which was true, but not reassuring. "He's coming here," she said again, and her voice was steady in the way that comes not from calm, but from having already processed the worst possibility and decided to stand in it anyway. I locked every door and every ground floor window while Jessica stayed with Diane in the kitchen. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived 18 minutes after Kowalski's call, one positioned at the front gate, one at the back porch near the terrace. I told Diane to go upstairs to her old room, lock the door, and not open it for anyone but me. She looked at me for a long moment before she went. "Be careful, please." "I've been careful for 68 years, I said. "Tonight is not the night that changes." She went upstairs. 10 o'clock. 11:30. The ranch was silent except for the heating system, the occasional low sound of cattle settling in the south field, and the creak of old timber framing doing what it had done for 40 years. At 11:48, I heard it. Not outside, inside. Below me, from the direction of the east barn, the working barn where Billy kept the equipment and where I maintained a small fireproof safe bolted to the concrete floor, holding estate documents, account records, and emergency property files. Owen had been in that barn. He'd helped Billy replace the door in May. He knew exactly what was in there. I moved through the house without turning on lights, took the back stairs, crossed the dark kitchen, and went out the side door into the night air. The deputy at the back porch was on the far side of the terrace. I could see his flashlight moving along the fence line. I crossed the yard to the east barn in 30 seconds, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The barn smelled of motor oil and hay, and the particular darkness of a space that hasn't had its lights on in hours. I hit the wall switch. He spun when the lights came on. His eyes were wild in a way I'd never seen from him before, the careful, controlled performance entirely gone, leaving something raw and cornered underneath. "Stay back," he said. His voice was ragged. "The deputies are 30 yards away," I said, keeping my voice level. "You are not leaving this barn, Owen." I just need the account numbers." His voice cracked on the last word, desperation breaking through. "The files in that safe, the estate records. I can still get out." "It's over," I said. It was over the moment Diane opened that laptop in March. Something shifted in his face. The wild desperation collapsed inward, and what replaced it was a grief so old and so heavy it looked like it had been living behind his eyes for years, waiting for a moment like this to surface. My chest ached with something complicated. Not sympathy for what Owen had done, but undeniable grief for what had been done to him a long time ago, by a series of failures that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with the ordinary cruelty of systems that process human beings without always remembering they're human. I knew Thomas Garrett's name," I said quietly. "I knew his case, and I am sorry for what happened to him after my courtroom." Owen lunged. He came fast and desperate toward the safe, both hands reaching. I stepped directly into his path, not to stop him physically, but to plant myself between him and the door, between him and any exit, the way a man stands when he's decided this ends here and not somewhere else. He hit my shoulder hard, and both of us stumbled. It was not graceful. It was 68 years old, and anger, and the specific stubbornness of a man who had been waiting 8 weeks for this exact moment. I got my mouth open. "Now, East Barn." "Harrison Webb," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Former Chief Judge, Middle District of Tennessee. He paid me $180,000, Callahan." The deputies pulled him through the door. I stood alone in the East Barn, blood on my shirt from where the struggle had torn through the fabric, my hands steadying themselves against the wall. Harrison Webb. Part 16. The confession on the kitchen table. I went back inside and sat at my desk with my hands still unsteady, blood drying on my shirt collar, Eleanor's photograph watching from the corner of the desk the way it always did. Harrison Webb. Former Chief Judge. United States District Court, Middle District of Tennessee, appointed 1998, served 14 years, forced to resign in 2017, following an internal judicial conduct investigation into allegations of improper financial relationships with attorneys appearing before his court, specifically accepting paid consulting arrangements through a shell company from two law firms whose cases he had ruled unfavorably over a period of 6 years. I had filed that complaint in January of 2017, after reviewing case records that crossed my desk through a judicial review committee I served on that year. The pattern had been unmistakable. The same attorneys, the same favorable rulings, financial structures just opaque enough to survive casual scrutiny, but not the scrutiny of a former investigator who had spent 36 years reading evidence with the specific intention of finding what people tried to hide. I had reported it because it was the right thing to do. I had reported it knowing it would cost Webb everything: his position, his reputation, the legacy of 14 years on the federal bench. I had not enjoyed it. I had not hesitated. Harrison Webb had lost everything because I told the truth about what he had done, and he had spent 8 years deciding how to make me pay for it. I called Victor Haynes at midnight. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "Webb," I said. "I've been running his financials for the last 2 hours." My jaw tightened until my back teeth ached. "He funded every stage." "He funded every stage," Victor confirmed. "And he provided the intelligence Owen couldn't have gathered from Charlotte. Diane's hospital schedule, the trust structure details, the financial account numbers, the engagement party date 6 months in advance. Webb was on the bench when you established the Callahan Family Trust, and at the time he still moved in the same legal circles as your estate attorneys." "He didn't just want the money," I said. "No," Victor said. "He wanted to watch you lose your daughter the way he lost his career. He wanted you to feel responsible. He wanted you to know you couldn't protect the one person who mattered most." A pause. "The money was Owen's incentive. The destruction was Webb's." I sat in the dark study for a long moment after Victor finished. I thought about Daniel Marsh sitting on a park bench with a letter in his jacket pocket. I thought about Caroline Marsh coming home from law school to find her father gone. I thought about Linda Hargrove and the $3.5 million her father had paid to make Owen disappear, not knowing it would only redirect him. All of it. Every destroyed family. Every stolen year. At 6 the following morning, Agent Kowalski called. "FBI agents executed a search warrant at Harrison Webb's residence in Brentwood at 5:45 this morning," she said. "Webb was taken into custody without incident." "What does it say?" I sat with that for a moment. "What are the charges?" "Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority under federal statutes that apply to former officers of the court." After the call, I drove to Memphis and met Caroline Marsh at a coffee shop near the courthouse where she worked. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands around a coffee cup, her back to the wall, the way people sit when they've learned to keep exits in view. She stood when she saw me, and we shook hands and sat down. I told her about Webb. "My father would have been 67 this year," she said quietly. "He would have had a garden by now. He always wanted a garden." She pressed her lips together. "He never got one because Owen Garrett needed money and Harrison Webb needed revenge." "I know," I said, "and I am sorrier for that than I know how to say." She looked up at me, eyes red, but her voice clear. "Every one of them," I said. She nodded slowly. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "Thank you for not paying him off." William Hargrove paid Owen to disappear, and it sent him straight to my father. I drove back to Cumberland Ranch in the early afternoon, the Tennessee hills green on both sides of the highway, the sky wide and clear and indifferent, the way it always is. Part 17, What the Courts Decided. August at Cumberland Ranch is the fullest month. The cattle are heavy from summer grass. The timber stands dark and deep along the eastern ridge. It had been 8 months since the arrests. Owen Garrett received 15 years in federal prison. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, assault on a law enforcement officer. The charges stacked cleanly, the evidence airtight, the recorder from my breast pocket delivering every word from that hotel room with the clarity of a confession freely given by a man who believed he was already finished. He stood at sentencing without expression. His eyes found mine once across the courtroom, and then moved away. I did not look away. Sandra Pruitt received 8 years. Conspiracy, forgery, wire fraud. She said nothing at sentencing. Her attorney argued diminish agency, that Owen had been the architect, and she only the instrument. The judge disagreed. She had drafted the documents. She had sent the emails. She had known exactly what she was building, and for whom. Harrison Webb received 7 years. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority under federal statutes governing former officers of the court. He was 71 years old, and his attorney argued for leniency on grounds of age and prior service. Afterward, she found me in the courthouse hallway. My father would have been glad, she said, her voice steady and clear. Not happy. I don't think he was a man who found happiness in punishment. Partial restitution from the seized Webb and Garrett accounts was awarded to the estates of Daniel Marsh and the other confirmed victims. It would not return what had been taken. But it was recognition, a court's formal acknowledgement that what had been destroyed had value, that the people destroyed had mattered. Part 18. What Grows Back. Diane's healing moved through that summer, the way the Cumberland River moves after heavy rain. Fast in some stretches, slow in others, occasionally doubling back on itself before finding the right channel forward. By June, she was back at the hospital part-time. By July, full-time. I want to bring someone to the ranch, she said, for Sunday dinner. His name is Michael Barlow. He's 37. He works in watershed restoration for the state. I smiled. Bring him Sunday, I said. I called Victor Haynes the next morning, out of old habit. He called back that afternoon. Clean record, stable career, genuine references. A man who was exactly who he said he was, with a history that had been lived rather than constructed. Michael Barlow arrived that Sunday afternoon, driving a sensible truck, carrying a jar of local honey from a farm near his office. He shook my hand and called me Judge Callahan without being told, because Diane had mentioned it and he had paid attention. He asked about the mineral lease renewal and listened to the answer without redirecting toward himself. He laughed at Diane's jokes without trying to top them. After lunch, Diane caught me watching them from the porch. She crossed the yard, climbed the steps, and stood beside me, slipping her arm through mine the way she had since she was small enough to reach my elbow. I know you ran a background check, she said. Old habits, I said. She laughed. Warm, real, surprised at itself. Thank you, she said quietly, for all of it, for believing me when I came to you, for not letting me face it alone. Diane looked out over the ranch. The cattle in the south pasture, the tree line going copper in the afternoon light, the east fence line where Eleanor used to walk on Sunday mornings, thinking things through. Do you think she knew it would be this bad? Diane asked. Oh no, I said. That evening I walked the east fence line alone at sunset, the way I have every evening since coming home to this ranch full-time. I stopped at the corner post, the old cedar one Eleanor used to touch with her hand when she turned around to walk back. You kept your promises, Robert, both of them. Now rest. Art 19. What I learned. I am 68 years old, and I have learned more from this chapter of my life than from 36 years on the federal bench. Trust your instincts, that quiet voice that whispers when something feels wrong. I almost talked myself out of listening to it more than once. That voice was a gift. Don't silence it the way I nearly did. If this experience taught me anything, it's this. Love is not weakness, but love without discernment is a door left unlocked. You can welcome people into your life and still pay attention. You can trust deeply and still verify carefully. Don't make the mistake I almost made, waiting too long to act on what you already know. Telling yourself you're being paranoid. Telling yourself the people you love deserve happiness more than they deserve protection. This was never really a story about revenge. It was about a father keeping two promises to the woman he loved. It was about a daughter brave enough to say 4 words that saved everything. And it was about the truth that justice, however long it takes, is always worth building carefully. A final note. This story blends real patterns of romance and inheritance fraud with fictionalized names, dialogue, and details, crafted for storytelling and educational purposes.